Let's continue reading Mother of Peace, and God Shall Wipe Away All Tears from Their Eyes, a memoir by Dr. Hak Jahan Moon. And those of you, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon leads an interreligious and international movement for peace. Since her war-torn childhood, she has yearned to realize God's dream of peace. Her path led to her holy wedding with Reverend Sun Myung Moon and an unimaginable life of sacrifice, perseverance, and devotion to God and humankind. Her story is a noble and touching drama of a village girl called to serve God's purpose as the mother of peace. In her word, my lifelong goal and determination is to fulfill the dream of God. Our Heavenly Parent longs to live together with all of us as generations of good and loving people, forming the Heavenly Parent's holy community, one family under God. I'm determined to bring that dream into reality during my remaining years, and I invite all my readers to join me in this historic task. Dr. Hak Jahan Moon. And on page 190, Creating the Road to One World. Over the subsequent decades, the North Korean government continued to treat us as its enemies. My husband and I had been carrying out victory over communism activities throughout the world, and we received information that North Korean leader Kim Il-sung wanted to assassinate us. Our members' 7 days public fast and prayer across the street around the United Nations in 1974 publicized the flight of Japanese women held captive in North Korea. In June 1975, shortly after the fall of Saigon, we held the World Rally of Korean Freedom, which brought over 1.2 million people to Yeouido Plaza in Seoul to stand strong against communism. With neither fear nor anger, my husband and I prayed ceaselessly for reconciliation between North and South Korea. We're not responsible for the division of the Korean Peninsula, but we took responsibility for its peaceful reunification. We have always felt that ending the conflict on the Korean Peninsula would turn the world toward peace. Hence, after returning from our meeting with Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev, we decided that we would have to meet Chairman Kim Il-sung of North Korea. We set a goal by the end of 1991. For more than 40 years, my husband and I had been unable to return to our hometown. Throughout the 1980s, we taught our principles in every corner of the world, but we couldn't go to North Korea, which is only an hour's flight from Seoul. It was the same for all displaced Koreans who had ended up in the South after the Korean War. Nothing can alleviate the longing and anguish that results from the inability to visit one's hometown, especially when it is so near. Nonetheless, the reason my husband and I wanted to go to North Korea was not to visit our hometown and relatives, even though we missed them dearly. In fact, the experiences we had been through in North Korea would lead most people never want to set foot there. The determination we made to go to North Korea seemed an impossible dream. North Korea would not even allow groups of journalists from the West to enter. But we continued our sincere prayers for forgiveness and reconciliation, and had our members reach out to North Korea in any way possible, believing that God would make a way out of no way. In an answer to our prayers, in mid-November 1991, while in the United States, a courier brought us a sealed invitation. We opened it in private, addressed to us personally. It stated that Chairman Kim Il-sung was inviting us to visit North Korea. Without informing our staff of our ultimate destination, we packed our clothes and departed to our church workshop center in Hawaii. Our family and personal staff were curious. "It's warm in Hawaii," they said, but you are packing winter clothes. Arriving in Hawaii, my husband and I lived in the workshop site and concentrated our minds in prayer. Before setting foot in North Korea, we had to resolve any painful feelings knotted up in our hearts. We had to forgive Kim Il-sung, whose regime had hurt the nation and world, not to mention our extended family and ourselves. If we had thought of him only as our enemy, we would not have forgiven him. Only in the position of his parents, only with the heart of his mother could I forgive. To save her son sentenced to death, a mother will even seek to change the laws of her country. That is what the maternal heart is like. Without that heart, I pledged to forgive my enemy. I did not pray for our safe return from North Korea. Those were serious hours in which we offered endless prayers. Just as Joshua circled Jericho 7 times, we went around the big island of Hawaii again and again, offering our sincerest commitment to heaven. Only after we had dissolved all the buried pain did my husband and I inform those who needed to know that we were on our way to North Korea. Those around us expressed the natural reaction, "You're going to the place that is controlled by your enemy. It's extremely dangerous." Completely different from going to Moscow. There is no Western or South Korean embassy there, no protection whatsoever. Whatever that letter said, there's no way Kim Il-sung will allow you to enter. Nonetheless, he's planning to keep you there forever. Though spoken out of concern for our well-being, such words tempted us to dwell on our private feelings and fears. Yet we knew that we had to truly forgive North Korean leader Kim Il-sung and embrace him with unconditional love, no matter the risk. We identified with Jacob offering everything he had, going to the risk of his life to meet with his brother Esau, who intended to kill him. After enduring 21 years of indescribable hardship while maintaining sincere devotion to his brother who hated him, Jacob gained the heavenly wisdom necessary to win Esau's heart. To change an enemy into a friend is truly impossible without the heart of a sincere parent. A few days later, with our minds clear and hearts resolved in unity, my husband and I, with a small staff, flew to Beijing. As we were sitting in the airport waiting room in Beijing, a North Korean representative appeared and handed us an official invitation. The document carried Pyongyang's official seal. On November 30, our group headed to North Korea on Chosun Airlines special aircraft JS-215. Sent by Chairman Kim. For our benefit, it flew over my husband's hometown, Cheongju, before landing in Pyongyang. As the plane passed over Pyongan province, where both my husband and I were born, we looked down on the Chongjun River, in which we both had played as children. I felt as if I could reach down and touch its blue ripples. Had that river been flowing peacefully during the sorrowful 4+ decades which our territory was recklessly torn apart? The chill of the cold winter wind we felt as we disembarked at Pyongyang Sunnan Airport dissipated as we received the embraces of my husband's relatives. Of course, they were grandmothers and grandfathers. They grabbed hold of our hand and wept. A waterfall of tears surged in my heart. I am sure my husband's as well, but I bit my lips and held them back. We had committed ourselves to this venture for the sake of Heavenly Parent and the world, not for the personal happiness of our relatives and ourselves. There would be another trip for that, we assured each other, casting our bread on the waters. We settled in at the Peony Guest Hall, and the next day, in accord with our lifelong tradition, we arose early in the morning and prayed. If there were surveillance cameras in our room, all those prayers calling out for the unification of the Korean Peninsula were recorded. That day and the next, we were given a tour of Pyongyang. Our meeting with a group of major North Korean government leaders at the Mansudae Assembly Hall on the 3rd day of our stay had become a legend in North Korea. My husband and I knew that to speak for God and against the government's Juche ideology in North Korea could be grounds for execution, but we were resolved to risk death for the sake of peace and unification. Let it go on record. Standing in the heart of North Korea, Father Moon denounced Juche thought and the Juche kingdom. He said loudly and clearly, the unification of North and South Korea cannot come based on Chairman Kim Il-sung's Juche thought. Now, North and South Korea can be unified peacefully, and Korea can become the nation that can lead the world only through the God-centered ideology and headwind thought of unificationism. Furthermore, he refuted their propagandist posture that the Korean War started with the South invading the North. By the end of his speech, Father Moon admonished them, "How can you call yourselves leaders? You cannot even control your own sex organs." The North Koreans were taken entirely by surprise. Their security personnel were anticipating the signal to rush in with guns drawn, even though they too some degree knew what Father Moon was planning to say. Our members accompanying us broke out in a cold sweat. I had toured the whole world with my husband, and we had met the leaders of many nations, but nowhere did we have to maintain courageous determination and serious resolve comparable to that day in Pyongyang. Father Moon's speech went far past the schedule for lunch, and everyone ate at separate tables in dead silence. Many thought that the chances of meeting Chairman Kim had just evaporated. My husband said it didn't matter. He had said what he came to say. On the sixth day, Chairman Kim sent 2 helicopters to transport us to Cheongju, Father Moon's hometown. As Chairman Kim had instructed, highway crews had newly paved the little road to my husband's boyhood home, set up dignified tombstone and planted turf at the graves of his parents. They even had painted and decorated the house where Father Moon was born and spread sand on the earthen floor and yard. We visited his parents' tombs and offered flowers. I gazed at the sky in the direction of Anju, my hometown. 18 miles away is old house that embraced me so snugly still standing there. Is the old house that embraced me so snugly still standing there? Is corn growing in the backyard fields these days? Where is my maternal grandfather's grave? I was curious about everything, but I held it inside. We had come to meet Chairman Kim Il-sung on behalf of our heavenly parent and to shape the future of our homeland. We had come for the sake of the nation and world. I could not entertain my personal feelings in light of that historic summons. I was there so that day would come when all Koreans and all people will be free to visit their hometowns. It was on the 7th day that we finally meet Chairman Kim. As we entered the chairman's white stone official residence in Majon, Hamgyongnam province, he was waiting for us without regard to protocol. My husband greeted Chairman Kim as if they were old friends, and Chairman Kim reciprocated, and we all took a deep breath as the two joyfully embraced each other. Chairman Kim, seeing me in a traditional Korean dress, politely gave his welcome. December 6, 1991, meeting with North Korean leaders Kim Il-sung, Father and Mother Moon were in for 8 days. We're in North Korea for 8 days. The first order of business was lunch, and while we ate, we began our conversation by unreservedly sharing small talk about things as hunting and fishing. Gradually, Father Moon and I introduced our current activities, including the World Culture and Sports Festival we planned for the coming August. Hearing that it would include a blessing ceremony of 30,000 couples from around the world, Chairman Kim offered the Myeongsasimni Beach in North Korea's beautiful Wonsan district, where the Sweetbriar is beautiful, as its venue. He also promised to open the port of Wonsan to transport all the couples to that site. Then all of a sudden, there were so many things to talk about. The conversation took on an energy of its own and continued far beyond its scheduled closure. My husband embraced his enemy, whom he had been preparing for decades to meet, with deep and intense love. Chairman Kim was impressed by our sincerity and accepted our proposals in a bright manner throughout the meeting. At that time, visitors from the free world visited North Korea at the risk of their lives. Communists hate religion, and my husband and I were co-founders of a religion. In addition to that, we were leaders of a global movement to end communism. Our trip to North Korea was not for the sake of joint economic ventures. We didn't go with a duplicitous motive. Duplicitous motive. Feigning interest in North Korea's benefit while actually being there for our own benefit. Such is typical of the political world, but that is not in our minds. For the sake of genuinely following the providential will, we went only with the heart of God to enlighten and lovingly embrace the communist leaders and open the way for genuine unification. We entered that land relying only on God and advised its supreme leader to receive heaven's decree. While in North Korea, even though we were honored as state guests, we could not sleep comfortably, knowing that there were thousands upon thousands of families separated and longing for each other. Because Korea was not yet unified, we stayed awake every night, seeking to connect heavenly fortune to that place through our heartfelt prayer. We spent those nights submitting ourselves to God for the sake of the unification of the Korean Peninsula. Political negotiations and economic exchange will come only on the foundation of the true love of God. By making this our focus, our talks with Chairman Kim open a new chapter for the unification of North and South Korea. Looking back, I reflect that it was at the moment communism reached its zenith that my husband and I risked our lives to go to Moscow and Pyongyang with joyful hearts as representatives of the free world. We embraced enemies who had severely persecuted us. By our doing so, they were moved, and we could reconcile. Thus, we laid the foundation for unification and peace. We went to North Korea not to get something, but to give genuine true love. For the sake of God, my husband and I forgave the unforgivable. For the sake of humanity, we loved the unlovable. August 5, 2007, opening of the World Peace Center in Pyongyang, built by the Unification Movement. Soon after the completion of our 8-day mission, North Korea's Prime Minister Yoon Young-muk led a delegation to Seoul and signed a joint declaration on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula with the South Korean government. Over the coming months, our movement set up an industrial enterprise, the Pyeonghwa Motors Factory, as well as Botong River Hotel and the World Peace Center, all in Pyongyang, as a cornerstone for unification. Afterwards, the seed planted by my husband and I at that time bore fruit with the visit of the South Korean president to North Korea to discuss the path toward unification. On that foundation, the shoots of peace and unification are growing. When those shoots blossom into full bloom, the earnest prayers of my husband and I have offered for Korean unification will be remembered forever. After our meeting with President Gorbachev and Chairman Kim, my husband and I snapped out our next step. We envisioned God-centered organization that will fill the vacuum about to be created by communism's demise and undergird effective peace building. With the tangible menace of militant communism now fading, and the reformation of religious faith and family-based morality was the next mountain to climb. It had taken more than 50 years to sweep international communism into the dustbin of history, but the decline of religion and family life is a subtler and therefore more pernicious threat. Religious leaders are tasked by God to guide people to live responsibly, but the influence of religion in modern times had been declining. Our challenge now became the restoration of religious faith as society's compass. Thus, we intensified our investment in bringing religious leaders to see beyond their denominational horizon, end interreligious conflict, and work together based upon universally shared God-centered values. These are the same absolute values around which we call scientists. These are the same values around which we called scientists, media professionals, and political leaders to work. Healthy societies of all races, nations, and religions arise on the foundation of morality and ethics, which in turn arise on the foundation of the love of God between husband and wife, parents and children. This love of God in the family is the source of absolute values, values that are universally shared and taught by all religions. We inspired faith leaders to work together and teach these universally shared values. We actually have invested more of our government's resources on this than on our growth of our church. Our vision brought together religious leaders and government leaders, centered around a common purpose of peace and true freedom. Renowned people from all walks of life who empathized with our objective became ambassadors for peace through the work of the Federation for World Peace and the Interreligious Freedom for World Peace. Starting in 2001 in Korea, the activities of these peace ambassadors quickly spread throughout the world. Inspired by this vision, peace ambassadors in 120 countries are putting down roots of true peace through project work in a broad range of fields. Where there are disputes, where poverty hinders education, where there is religious intolerance, where people lack sufficient medical care, peace ambassadors alleviate their pain and help them improve their lives. Then at New York City's Lincoln Center on September 12, 2005, we inaugurated an umbrella organization, the Universal Peace Federation, or UPF. Following that event, my husband and I embarked upon a tour of 120 nations to meet ambassadors for peace and establish UPF national chapters. UPF brings together people and organizations across the world through programs supporting the realization of a world of genuine peace. The Universal Peace Federation is now an NGO in general consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council, or ECOSOC, where its representatives work with like-minded, peace-loving global citizens. A United Nations Peace Garden. I did not learn to yield. I did not learn to kneel. These bold declarations are spoken in the epic Korean film, The Great Battle, by one of Korea's famous military heroes, Yang Man-chun, Lord of Ansi Fortress. The 2018 film, seen by millions of people, depicted the true story of how Yang Man-chun and the soldiers and the people of the Ansi Fortress city held off the Chang dynasty's army of 500,000 men for 88 days in AD 645. The Ansi Fortress was the final bulwark of the failing Goguryeo dynasty against the powerful and fearsome Chinese invaders. Yang Man-chun was not fully allied with Goguryeo General Yon Gae-so-moon. But as an Ansi Fortress commander, he invested everything to unite his people despite suffering, hunger, and death. They ultimately forced the Chinese to retreat and save the fortress. This is just one of the many stories about the brutal foreign invasions the Korean people had endured. We had been able to protect our beautiful mountains and rivers for millennia because of our patriotism and willingness to sacrifice. As true parents, Father Moon and I uphold the Korean Peninsula as the land where all civilization will blossom and bear fruit. Nonetheless, the unfortunate 70-year history of division in Korea continues because the ideological barrier between democracy and communism still takes precedence over the love of family and clan. Parents and children and siblings, both north and south, have had to live for decades without knowing whether their family members are alive or dead. Even in the era of the internet, the line of lamentation that divides the Korean peninsula and separates blood relatives is a geographical line. But that is superficial. The real division is over worldviews and values. It is the fierce confrontation between atheism and theism over the question of whether or not God exists. Father Moon and I have invested sincere devotion and great effort to end the Cold War and unify North and South Korea. Beginning in 1968, we spread the Victory Over Communism lectures throughout Korea and around the world to reveal the falsehood of the communism in the 1980s. Our members developed BOC materials into the Causa manual and gave Causa lectures on campuses, in conferences to students of all ages, pastors of all faith, and social leaders in all fields. The newspapers we established globally, such as the Washington Times, provided accurate information about the tension of the Korean peninsula and the reality of life under communist government. As I just described in 1990, we provided the spiritual energy for President Gorbachev to continue on his path to reform, which led to the abandonment of communism as a structure of global power. And our meeting with Chairman Kim Il-sung opened the gates of exchange for the sake of unification between North and South Korea. Since then, the UPF had expanded to more than 190 countries, serving as another foundation upon which the international community can cooperate in the benefit from the unification of the Korean peninsula. And yet, it seems to me that the new generation of South Koreans do not understand how the Korean War arose and why the unification of our people is necessary. Therefore, today, I'm working even harder for this cause. This is one purpose of the Peace Road activism. As a culmination of the Peace Roads events in 2015, riders in Korea cycled to the Imjin-gak Pavilion, located north of Seoul at the Imjin River, which divides the Koreas. From that site, they would see the demilitarized zone, or DMZ, in North Korea. The participants created a dramatic moment by singing the Korean song, "Our cherished hopes are for unity." All Koreans feel a deep gratitude to the United Nations. Were it not for the United Nations, the Republic of Korea would not exist. When the North Korean People's Army, with Soviet backing, invaded South Korea on the morning of June 25, 1950, their ambition was to communize South Korea. They might have succeeded, as Korea was a small, poor country whose name was hardly known to the wider world. But the United Nations swiftly called on its member nations to defend democracy on the Korean peninsula, and 16 countries sent troops, while others sent medical support. The UN forces fought hard, risking their lives in an unfamiliar land to protect freedom and peace. At that time, as I mentioned above, my husband was confined in a death camp, sentenced to hard labor at the Hongnam nitrogen fertilizer factory. He was freed soon after the UN forces landed at the port of Incheon in September 1950. They pushed their way up into the northern part of the peninsula as far as the city of Hongnam. The prison camp guards were killing all the prisoners. But the night prior to my husband's scheduled execution, the guard learned about the approaching UN forces and fled. Heaven surely was behind the UN Security Council's decision to send a multinational force to turn back the communist invasion. The ultimate reason for the UN peacekeeping action was a hidden one: to save the only begotten Son and protect the only begotten daughter. In accordance with God's will, our lives were preserved. Why would God have protected our nation, the Korean peninsula, in that historically difficult and troublesome crisis? The world was just recovering from World War II, and now it plunged into another torturous battle on a global scale. The fact that our national anthem includes the words, "May God protect and preserve our nation," points to the answer. It can be explained best in the terms of God's providence. To complete the providence, in 1943, God sent His begotten daughter, the first woman who could receive God's first love since the fall of Adam and Eve to Korea. As do all people, this only begotten daughter had to grow to maturity. She needed time until she could recognize, understand, and accept her responsibility for the salvation of humankind. A child cannot simply go out and lead the providence. That is why God protected His only begotten daughter until she grew to the age when she could know Heavenly Parent's mind, feels Heavenly Parent's heart, and determine with her own will to own Heavenly Parent's mission. God preserved the environment of religious freedom for the sake of the fulfillment of Jesus' final words in the Bible. Surely I am coming soon. Jesus and the Holy Spirit called and led the only begotten Son and only begotten daughter to complete the mission of the Messiah as the true parents of humankind. To protect this mission, heaven guided the UN forces to enter the war to defend freedom. The United Nations established its headquarters in New York City at the end of World War II. 70 years have since passed. There are 3 other major UN offices in Geneva, Vienna, and Nairobi. But even though the world has entered the Asia-Pacific era, there is no major UN office in Asia. I have recommended that the UN open its 5th international office in Korea, specifically in the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ. On the 38th parallel, I am supporting various groups including the Universal Peace Federation and the Citizens Federation for the unification of North and South Korea in these efforts to turn the DMZ into a global peace park. This will bring the issue of Korean reunification to the attention of the world's people as no other action can. All the nations of Asia could be pleased to serve as the site of a new global UN headquarters. But I believe that Korea has unique qualification. It houses the international headquarters of the Unification Peace Federation and of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace. Spiritually speaking, as the nation in which true parents were born, Korea has something very deep within its culture that can serve the world. Some 70 years ago, the UN forces shed blood and sweat for the sake of peace in Korea. By ending the division on the peninsula, the UN would complete the mission of those soldiers who gave their lives and inspire peace in the world. In his speech given at the United Nations headquarters in New York in 2000, my husband announced our vision as a peace park in the demilitarized zone. 15 years later, in May 2015, at the UN office in Vienna, Austria, I proposed that a 5th UN office be built there. The President of the Republic of Korea himself proposed to North Korea at the UN that a peace park be built in the DMZ. If North and South Korea invite the UN to build its 5th office in the DMZ, it will, by that very act alone, turn a theater of war. There are so many on both sides at the conflict shed their blood into a Mecca of peace. I will end in here, and thank you so much for joining. This is amazing. Now, True Mother, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon, has just launched the Think Tank 2022, where the unification of North and South Korea was shared based on the inspiration of many and the initiative of Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon. Thank you so much for joining, and please read the Mother of Peace book. So much things we can learn from this book and its history and the future as well. God bless you. See you again soon. Bye.